Welcome to Attainable Green. I'm Jess, and today we're going to be talking about my spotted maxillarias. So about a year and a half ago, I picked up my wishlist maxillarias. This is the Maxillaria pseudoreichenheimiana and the reichenheimiana. Over the past year and a half, I have been trying to grow these plants and to figure out what the differences are between the two. So I started off with 3 plants. I ended up losing 2 of them over the winter season last year, and I got some replacement plants. So in total, I have 3 plants once again. So I am going to go over a little bit about what happened to these plants and how I plan on taking care of them. So the first plant I'm going to talk about is the Maxillaria reichenheimiana Kyla. This is the original plant that I had purchased in my previous video, and it looks pretty similar. I think I lost a couple of leaves and some new growths did mature, but overall this plant looks pretty stagnant. If anything, I think it looks a little smaller than it originally did, and I definitely went through a lot of changes with this plant. So originally this plant was potted up in a small bark mix that had a little bit of seashell in it. So that was a signal to me that it needed a little bit extra calcium. I potted this plant up in sphagnum moss last year since I felt like I couldn't maintain enough hydration for this plant. I wanted to help it stay well watered, but I just couldn't water it all the time. So I hoped that sphagnum moss would be the solution. That didn't necessarily end up happening. Some of the leaves started yellowing off and dying. Some of the new growths also started to die off, and I couldn't quite figure out why. During the spring to fall season, I had no problems with this plant. But when it comes to the winter time, that's where I ended up with some trouble. I think with these maxillarias, they're really sensitive to cooler temperatures, and they don't really like that. So my first winter with these plants, they were still outside and they definitely did not like the cooler temperatures. The leaves started to fall off and the plant overall just started not looking happy. So this winter, I decided to bring all of these plants indoors and hopefully it'll do better this season. Luckily, this winter season has been more beneficial, but there were still some problems that I'm still trying to figure out. So back to the reichenheimiana. This winter season, this plant actually started to threw out a couple of spikes and almost tried to bloom. I think the buds got to be about half of the size I think they're supposed to be, and then they got blasted. I'm not sure what caused the buds to blast. It could be a number of things. It could be change in temperature, either from cold to hot or hot to cold, because we have quite large temperature swings here in Southern California. Another thing could be changes in humidity. In the wintertime, we have Santa Ana winds that come through every so often, and that's when the humidity can dip to the low 30s, and outdoors it can dip down to 10% humidity or even lower. Usually it's not a problem, but I think these plants are a little bit more sensitive, so for some reason the buds just blasted. Currently, this reichenheimiana is starting to create some new growths, so I'm hoping that this season it will do well and stabilize so I don't have to worry about these plants dying on me. Hi. So the reichenheimiana seems to be more hardy of the 2 types between the pseudoreichenheimiana and the reichenheimiana. This one definitely made it through the entire time. I've had this one for a year and a half and I'm still learning as I go. This spring season, since there's new growths coming in, I decided to repot this plant once again into a different setup. I decided to use Kanama as the media of choice because it is water retentive, it's inorganic, and it has a slightly acidic pH. And hopefully this will help the plant to stay well hydrated. I chose Kanama over moss because Kanama is easier to tell when it is dried because it changes color. It goes from like a orangey yellowish color when it's fully wet. When it's fully dry, it takes on a pale whitish yellow color. So it's more distinctive for me, and I think it just does better than moss overall. I'm keeping this plant indoors from now on because I feel like the outdoor temperature changes are just not sufficient to keep these plants well hydrated. So the next species is the Maxillaria pseudoreichenheimiana. Now this is a mouthful, and these plants to me are a little bit more finicky than the other species. And that's primarily because I had two other plants, one from Andes orchids and one from Kawamoto orchids, and they both died during the winter time. I think they're just not as hardy and they don't like cooler temperatures, so I just have to keep them So I know I have to keep them warmer during the winter season. I would venture to guess that these plants don't like temperatures below 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and they prefer more stable temperatures. So I think my indoor environment will be much better suited for them. In the wintertime, that's when all the problems started. So I tried to back off my waterings, but the plants started to dry out and desiccate. And then when I did water the plants, they stayed wet for too long, and either it had too much salt buildup or something, the leaves started to fall off. Not only that, but the new growth started rotting, and then over time, the entire plant just became completely leafless, desiccated, and it just didn't look healthy anymore. So I ended up getting two replacement plants from two different places once again. I got one from Andes Orchids to try it again, and the second one I got from High Desert Orchids. Now the one from Andes Orchids looks very similar to the one I had got previously. The only difference is it's slightly smaller, but I know that it's healthy, it bloomed before, and it has quite a bit of leaves. So I think the bigger the plant, the healthier and more vigorous it should be. So hopefully it can withstand some abuse and mistreatment as I'm trying to learn how to take care of these plants. The second plant from High Desert Orchids looks a little different because it doesn't have any of the reddish tinges on the leaves. It's a smaller plant overall, but it seems to be liking its current setup. It was originally potted in moss, and I decided to switch it to Kanama. So I switched all of these plants into a Kanama media setup, and hopefully that will just give a more even distribution of moisture for these plants. And because the media changes color drastically when it's wet versus dry, I'm more liable to water these plants better so they don't dry out for long periods of time. I put the larger plant in a self-watering setup, so hopefully that will help maintain the hydration when I don't get the chance or opportunity to water these plants as regularly. So this larger plant also tried to bloom, and I saw at least 10 spikes on this plant, and it also developed buds, and the buds blasted, all of them, all at once, all in one day. Once again, I'm still trying to figure out why it did that, but I know there is a distinct difference because the reichenheimiana set buds in middle of the winter season. December and January was when the spikes were initiated. With the pseudoreichenheimiana, I saw spikes come in February or March, and I was hoping that this plant would be in flower by now. But since the buds all blasted, I don't have them to show, but I can only show you what remains, so it's not as impressive. Hopefully I will do better next year so that I'll be able to actually show what the flowers look like, and maybe that'll be more of a distinctive difference between these two plants. So far, this is one of my more challenging plants that I'm trying to grow, and because I love the foliage so much, I am really investing a lot of time and energy to try to understand these plants better. I know that it likes higher humidity, it likes to be evenly moist, more shaded, dappled light conditions, and I think because it has such fine roots, that water quality might also play a role. I'm trying to give these plants water with lower TDS, so I am mixing my tap water with some distilled water. I'm hoping that this will be something that the plants will like, and by taking this kind of holistic approach, hopefully we'll see some positive return. I'm going to see how this year goes and progresses, and winter is definitely the most testing, trying time for these plants because I know from now until maybe November, these plants will grow no problem. I will probably see new growths, new shoots, new leaves, everything, and it'll just look fine and happy. And then once November, December roll on and the temperature starts cooling down, that's when I start to worry. These are my 3 maxillarias. They have beautiful leaves. Even though they're not really known for their flowers, I really want to see the flowers. I haven't really noticed any major differences between these two plants aside from what I've already mentioned. So if you grow this plant and you grow it well, please give me some tips. But if you're also interested in growing this plant and you have no idea, you can also pick one up and test it out. Join the experiment and let me know your thoughts and observations. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel Attainable Green to follow along on my orchid growing journey. See you all next time. Bye!